the unseen reversal, when heaven declares enough. The world may not hear it, but the Spirit does that inward quake that shakes false kingdoms to their knees. And tonight, that is exactly what's happening. The stage where arrogance once paraded is about to collapse under its own weight. For a long season, the narcissist strutted across your life, as though untouchable, charming, cruel, certain of their own power. They wore control like a crown, deceiving even themselves into believing that God's silence was approval. But silence is not absence. The patience of heaven is not permission. There is a point where mercy withdraws, where the cup of pride overflows, and where divine justice begins to move in ways the proud cannot comprehend. You see, the narcissist thought they had escaped consequence. They believed their manipulation was skill, their betrayal a strategy. And then came the new supply, the accomplice who mistook counterfeit light for genuine fire, the one who believed that standing beside deception would somehow protect them from it. But the same fire that once seduced now consumes. This is the hour of reversal, not born of human vengeance, but of divine order restoring itself. When God reclaims the narrative, the first become last, the deceiver becomes exposed, and the victim becomes the vessel of truth. That's not karma as a superstition. That's spiritual law. What a man sows, he will reap. And so, as this spiritual wind turns, those who mocked your faith are about to learn that you were never fighting alone. Because justice has a memory, and heaven has impeccable timing. And, as we step further into that truth, we begin to see how this moment is not chaos, but correction, the sacred rebalancing that exposes what was hidden beneath the mask of charm. The law of return, when every action finds its author. There is a sacred rhythm written into the fabric of creation, one that cannot be bribed, manipulated, or escaped. It is the law of return, the unchangeable truth that what a man sends out into the world will one day find its way back to his own doorstep. For some, it returns as blessing. For others, it returns as judgment. And for the narcissist and their chosen accomplice, it is returning now, not with mercy, but with measure. When they lied about you, they believed their words would vanish into the air. When they mocked your faith, they thought heaven would stay quiet. When they turned your kindness into a weapon, they assumed that time would bury the evidence. But time is not a cover for sin. It is the courier of truth. The very days they counted as victory were the same days their own harvest was quietly ripening. And now, the field they planted in deceit stands before them, ready for reaping. God's justice doesn't rush. It doesn't move with human impatience. It allows the arrogant to build high enough to expose themselves. It allows the deceiver to weave such a web that even they can no longer find the way out. And when that moment comes, when pride has stretched itself to its breaking point, the hand of the Lord moves not with rage, but with precision. He doesn't strike to destroy. He simply withdraws his protection, and the weight of their own choices begins to crush them. The narcissist once believed that charm was a shield. They thought that if they smiled brightly enough, no one would notice the darkness behind it. They used people like stepping stones, each heart just another surface to climb toward false glory. And the new supply, blinded by flattery, eager to feel chosen, became a willing participant in this illusion. Together, they built a kingdom without a cornerstone, a future without truth, a love without God. But what isn't built in truth cannot endure. Their laughter fades into arguments. Their unity turns to competition. Their passion curdles into paranoia. They start to feel what they once made you feel: uncertain, anxious, small. And as they look around, They begin to realize that they are now living inside the very pain they once delighted in watching you endure. This is the law of return. It never misses its mark. For every time they conspired in secret, another door closes. For every person they deceived, another opportunity disappears. For every lie they told to protect their image, another truth rises to expose it. This is not coincidence. It is consequence. It is heaven, balancing what human hands distorted. You see, when you were being slandered, when your name was being dragged through whispers, you didn't need to fight back. God was already collecting the evidence. And now, what was done in darkness is being answered in daylight. Not because he delights in destruction, but because he cannot allow deception to reign forever. The God of truth does not lose to lies. So, as this law of return unfolds, you will witness something remarkable, not just the fall of those who harmed you, but the unveiling of why it had to happen this way. Because divine justice doesn't merely repay, it reveals. It teaches the living that every action, every intention, every choice bears fruit, and one day that fruit will demand to be tasted. And as their world begins to tremble under the weight of their own harvest, another truth begins to emerge. That everything they sent toward you was never wasted, it was merely redirected, waiting for the appointed time to return home. And that time has come. The scales are shifting. The seeds they sowed are fully grown. And what once looked like triumph is about to turn into testimony, not yours of pain, but God's of justice. It is in that trembling moment, when the proud begin to reap what they sowed, that the story moves toward the heart of divine revelation, the collapse of the unholy alliance that dared to mock grace itself. The collapse of the unholy alliance. There is no alliance strong enough to survive when its foundation is deceit. Two hearts joined in manipulation may appear united for a time, but their unity is a mirage, a shadow of connection built on the ruins of someone else's pain. And that is exactly what the narcissist and the new supply have created, a partnership born from rebellion, sustained by illusion, and destined for collapse. At first, everything between them looked intoxicating. The laughter was loud, the gestures exaggerated, the pictures perfect. They wanted the world to see what they had built, the performance of happiness. But performances end. And when the curtain falls, only truth remains. The smiles fade, the excitement turns stale, and the silence between them begins to echo with everything they've tried to avoid. Because what bonded them together was not love, but worship of the same idol, the self. The narcissist worships control, the thrill of bending another soul to their will. The new supply worships validation, the desperate need to feel chosen, even if the price is their own peace. So while one manipulates to feed the ego, the other submits to escape the emptiness. But no one can build a covenant where truth is not welcome. You see, every time they spoke your name in mockery, they invited judgment into their own home. Every time they rewrote the past to make themselves the hero, they dug deeper into the pit they now share. At first, they mistook comfort for chemistry, believing that because they shared the same bitterness, they shared a bond. But bitterness does not bind, it burns. And now that fire has begun to consume the very walls that once felt safe. Arguments that begin in whispers now erupt into shouting matches. What once was affection turns into accusation. Their trust dissolves under suspicion. The narcissist accuses the new supply of disloyalty, while the new supply quietly wonders why every story about you still lingers in the narcissist's eyes. The same obsession that once united them now divides them. They begin to see one another not as partners, but as mirrors, mirrors that reveal what they both tried to hide. And that, more than anything, is unbearable for the narcissist. Because in that mirror, they see themselves stripped of disguise, a person driven by emptiness, craving worship, yet incapable of giving love. They see that the new supply isn't a victory. They are evidence proof that the narcissist never healed, only repeated. And for the new supply, the realization cuts even deeper. They traded truth for attention, exchanged peace for chaos, and inherited the very misery they once pitied in you. What they called destiny was deception. What they called love was addiction. And what they called happiness was simply a pause before consequence. When a relationship is built in sin, it cannot stand beneath the weight of consequence. Every hidden conversation, every manipulative word, every smug victory over another's heartbreak becomes a brick soaked in rot. And now, the structure cannot bear its own weight. They can feel it in their daily lives, the exhaustion, the confusion, the sudden emptiness when the thrill fades. Even the laughter sounds wrong now, because the spirit knows when it's been living in counterfeit light. They begin to sense that something has turned against them, not a person, but the moral fabric of life itself. Their own actions echo back with precision, reminding them of every wound they inflicted. The narcissist who once mocked your tears now feels their own sleeplessness. The new supply who once believed they had won now feels what it's like to be disposable. It's the circle closing quiet, precise, unrelenting. But even in this collapse, God's justice remains merciful. He allows them to see clearly, painfully, that the union they celebrated was never love at all. It was a classroom, a place where illusion teaches its final lesson, that no partnership built on another's suffering can ever produce peace. And when that truth settles in, it doesn't explode like thunder. It erodes day by day, moment by moment, until the silence between them becomes the loudest sound in the room. That is the collapse, not just of their relationship, but of the fantasy that sustained it. And as the pieces fall, something divine begins to stir in the aftermath. Because once illusion dies, revelation lives. And revelation always points toward the author of truth, who now steps into the ruins to reveal that every false bond must break before genuine restoration can begin. And from those ashes, the story turns toward what no one can outrun. The mirror of consequences. When evil consumes itself, there is a point when deception runs out of energy, when the lies can no longer hold their shape, when manipulation loses its audience, and when the soul that fed on control begins to collapse under its own hunger. That is the hour the narcissist now faces. Not the drama of external punishment, but the quiet horror of divine consequence, the kind that begins from within. God does not need to strike them down. He simply steps aside. He lets them live in the world they built. He lets them taste what they served. And it is that taste, bitter, choking, cold, that becomes the truest judgment of all. They used to laugh when they lied. They celebrated your suffering as if it were proof of their power. They told themselves that cruelty was cleverness, that betrayal was survival, that you were too weak to ever rise again. But as time has passed, the harvest of every deceitful act has begun to bloom in their own life. The same traps they set for others now close around their feet. The same loneliness they forced upon you now swallows them whole. The same restless thoughts that once tormented your nights now haunt their own. It is not coincidence. It is the law of spiritual balance, the mirror of consequences. Every soul carries within it a reflection, and God allows the narcissist to finally see theirs. No filters, no applause, no control. Only the truth, staring back, bruised, hollow, terrified. They see the faces they wounded. They remember the promises they broke. They feel the silence of the people who once endured their abuse. And though they try to drown out the guilt with distractions, nothing satisfies anymore. The pleasure is gone. The excitement is gone. The supply is gone. All that remains is the echo of their own choices. And for the first time, they realize that the enemy they've been fighting isn't you, it's themselves. Because you moved on, you healed, you rose. But they stayed behind, trapped in a loop of their own making, replaying scenes they thought they controlled. And now, even the new supply begins to see through them. The mask that once looked mysterious now looks monstrous. The stories that once sounded convincing now sound desperate. They have become exposed not by others, but by their own pattern repeating too loudly to hide. This is how evil consumes itself. Not in fire or thunder, but in the slow decay of its own emptiness. The narcissist wanted to be worshipped, but now they stand before a shattered altar. They wanted to be admired, but now every admirer turns away. They wanted to be feared, but now fear visits them in silence, in loss, in the reflection they can no longer avoid. God is not cruel, He is corrective. He does not strike in anger, but in wisdom, allowing their own choices to become their sermon. And while they tremble under the weight of that truth, you are being restored. You are living proof that God redeems the faithful and exposes the false. The peace you now carry is not luck, it's evidence. It's the divine confirmation that no evil deed goes unanswered and no genuine heart goes unseen. So, if you have endured their deception and wondered if justice would ever find its way back to you, hold steady in faith. Your silence is not weakness, it is alignment with divine order. Comment below with the words, "I trust His justice," as a declaration that you will not chase revenge, for heaven is already fighting on your behalf. And that faith, that steady posture in the face of unfairness, becomes your greatest witness, because while you remain calm in the light, they are unraveling in their own darkness. And as that unraveling deepens, something even greater begins to unfold, the holy separation that divides truth from illusion, ensuring that what once harmed you will never hold power over you again. Their anger toward God, the last rebellion of pride. When their world begins to crumble, the narcissist does not fall to their knees in repentance. They lift their fist toward heaven in defiance. They cannot comprehend that what they are enduring is not cruelty, but consequence. And because their pride cannot process correction, they convince themselves that they are being attacked by the very God who is trying to awaken them. You will recognize this moment by the bitterness that seeps through their words. They begin to speak with anger toward everything sacred. The same mouth that once whispered manipulation now spits blame at you, at life, at God Himself. They curse the light that exposes them, yet they forget that they were the ones who invited darkness into their own home. It is not that God has turned against them. It is that they have spent too long walking away from Him. There's a tragic irony in this stage of judgment. They once mocked your prayers. They once rolled their eyes at your faith, calling it weakness. But now that their own foundations have turned to dust, they are forced to face the emptiness of a life without spiritual anchor. And when they reach out for comfort, they find that even the voices that once applauded them are gone. The crowd has dispersed. The illusion of support has dissolved. The stage is empty. Only silence remains. In that silence, they begin to wrestle with the reality of what they've done. The loneliness feels unbearable. The loss of control feels like suffocation. They can no longer fill the void with admiration, because the supply has dried up. They can no longer hide behind charm, because no one believes them anymore. And so their pride, too heavy to lift, too stubborn to lay down, becomes the very stone that drags them under. This is the tragedy of a hardened heart. They would rather accuse heaven than surrender to it. They would rather rewrite the story than repent of it. Even as mercy waits, they cling to the delusion that they can argue with God and win. But the one who spoke the universe into existence